now that's in the rearview mirror, metaphorically, I wanted to talk about my Bolt EV buyback experience. In short, it seemed to be going okay until the dealership that had agreed to host the buyback ghosted GM entirely. And then my rep at GM, who was supposed to kind of pick up the pieces from that, also decided to ghost me. But before we get into that, I hope you'll permit me a little backstory about the order of events that led to this, complete collapse in communications. So, for starters, I bought my 2023 Bolt EV new at around 1,600 miles. The transmission pump failed. Pretty rough way to start things off, but this is what warranties are for, I figured. So, no problem. Take it in, get it sorted. This is when I discovered the joy of waiting on back-ordered parts. And as much as I'd like to single out GM on this issue, it kind of seems like most manufacturers are pretty content letting their customers wait weeks and or months for parts these days. So I don't really think it's just a GM thing, but obviously if your car has more parts failures, this is going to be a thing you're going to run into more. Anyway, it ended up taking 15 days to get a transmission pump for my car, but my local dealership was pretty cool, and they actually loaned me a Blazer EV in the meantime, so I was not complaining about that. That was pretty great. 10 days into waiting for this part, though, someone from GM's California buyback team contacted me. I hadn't asked for any contact from them. This was just totally proactive on their part. So the person I'm going to call Sally, I don't want to give people's real names here because I don't want to dox anyone, but Sally was the rep that contacted me. She wanted to start collecting my purchase paperwork in case a buyback was required, So I appreciate that GM reached out without me, needing to interact with them at all. That seemed like good communication to me, because they weren't exactly sure when the part was going to come in, so they were concerned, that it might exceed the lemon law requirements for my state. So on day 16, the dealership, they got the part on day 15. They were able to fix it and return it to me basically by day 16. So, I figured that was that. Time to move on in my life. Unfortunately, a few months later, I noticed that the steering column had developed a sort of clicking or creaking noise while being rotated. I actually have a video about it here on the channel. I might have just tried ignoring this if my ownership experience hadn't gotten off to such a bad start, but I was annoyed to be dealing with another issue on the car, since it was still pretty nearly new, even if this one didn't prevent me from driving it. I'd kind of read online about some people having similar issues, so I took it in hoping for a quick fix. Fix number one was adding some seam sealer. This did not resolve the issue, so I took it in a second time. This time they wanted to try replacing a tie bar in the dashboard. Naturally, this part was also on back order. It ended up taking them 2 months for this part to arrive, but at least the car was drivable in the meantime. So, it wasn't a huge deal. Just kind of weird and annoying. So, dealership finally gets the tie bar. I bring the car back in. I guess they start tearing apart the dashboard without actually checking the box that the part is in, because once they checked, they realized that GM had sent either an incomplete part or the wrong part. It wasn't real clear. They said it was missing bolt holes, which seems pretty fundamental. Since the car was already disassembled at this point, they couldn't give it back to me, and they were now forced to reorder the back-ordered part a second time, which, it took a couple weeks for the correct tie bar to come this time. And again, the part finally arrives, they do the repair. So, everything seems fine for about a month. Creaking's kind of gone away. But after that point, the clicking issue started not only coming back, but actually was worse than it was the first time. It turned into more of a clicking and a creaking in a way that it hadn't initially been. And by this point, in total, I'd lost something like, 30, 40 days. More than 30 days, at least, across all the repair attempts they'd done. Since the problem had come back, I decided to call the EV concierge at this point and just requested a buyback, as I was kind of done fighting with the car. And things had just gone off to, such a bad start. I was just kind of sour on the whole thing. So they got me in touch with Sally again at the California buyback team, since she'd already worked with me earlier. She resumed the steps of requesting paperwork about the repair attempts and timeline. And meanwhile, the car went back in for a third repair attempt. During this time, the buyback was approved. And again, GM's communications in general at the stage seemed fine. Didn't have any issue with them. Meanwhile, the dealership ended up replacing the entire steering column as the fix this time, which actually did seem to fix the clicking issue. And it also seemed to fix some other issue that I noticed where the steering was really hard to turn. Or not really hard, but it's just noticeably stiff. So I think replacing the steering column actually kind of resolved both things, and probably that was why the clicking had been happening in the first place. But since the buyback was already in progress, I was ready to be done with the car. I didn't really see any point in not just continuing with that process after all this shenanigans. So this is where I encountered the first big speed bump with the buyback process. To actually buy the car back, Sally, the GM buyback rep, had to find a dealership that was willing to host the final inspection and buyback paperwork signing. This ended up being like way more of a difficult thing than I expected it to be. She went through like 4 dealerships. They just kept saying no. I guess dealerships aren't under any real obligation to help with buybacks, and it doesn't seem like GM really provides them with any incentive to help. So I think for most of them, it seems like they're just like, well, this is just a huge waste of our time. There's like a bunch of other things we'd rather be doing than trying to help, do a warranty claim, essentially, just to pull the car back. So she finally finds a dealership that she said agreed to help. But, at this point, several weeks have passed, and I'm already getting kind of frustrated. So once Sally had found this dealership, this kind of goes on to the next speed bump, which is, at that point, you have to be handed off to a completely different buyback team. So I got assigned this new rep called Martha, and they're over at a department in Michigan. So my original buyback rep was a California-based rep. Now I got turned over to this other rep in Michigan. And this seemed like she was kind of like a higher level support member. They're the ones actually drafting the final offer letters and stuff. So I guess they're just like higher level support than the California team was. So the problem here, and this is another thing. So far we've had the problem of having to rely on a dealership actually saying yes. We've run into the problem where the buyback request has to be handed off to a completely different department at a certain stage. And the third problem was that the second department has to then reconfirm with the dealership that they're okay to do the buyback. So this is another point where the dealership could just decide, no, even though he said yes last time, maybe we just won't respond to the second request, or we'll say no this time. In this case, they just didn't even bother to respond to Martha at this from the second team. So 2 weeks go by, she still isn't able to contact them, and she's just like, well, sorry, since they didn't respond, I'm gonna have to kick your case back to Sally, because she's the one that actually has to find the dealership, to approve the process. So Martha kicks the case back to Sally, and then it's just radio silence. And this is really where the communications with GM completely broke down, and probably the biggest problem with this whole process. Once the case had been kicked back to Sally, I tried calling her. I tried leaving voicemails. I tried sending her emails. I asked the Key EV concierge to contact her. And over the course of a month, she just never got back to me. Just nothing. It was like she had just disappeared from the planet. I could still reach her voicemail, but it was just like nobody was there. So, in desperation, I even emailed Mary Barra, the CEO of GM, based off some online advice, but I don't think she actually responds to anyone, nor would any of her staff at this point. I think that trick has been it might be dead at this point. I was pretty frustrated then. I felt like I was completely powerless, honestly. I had reached out to everyone I could think of, and it seemed like no one was willing to help. Like, when I tried to call back Martha, the person at the Michigan team, she basically said since the case had been kicked back to Sally, there's nothing she could do. Even though I explained Sally wasn't responding, she just didn't care. So that was pretty frustrating. But, finally in desperation, instead of just calling Martha specifically at the Michigan team, I just called their general number, hoping that I'd get somebody else from that team, since they seemed like the higher level support group. And by some miracle, I got in touch with some guy we're going to call Bob, who answered, and even though he'd never touched my case and knew nothing about it, he took down my info. He sent an email to Sally, Sally's manager, his own manager, just asking why she hadn't responded to me in over 30 days. And like magic, that afternoon she called. So I don't know what to think about this at this point, right? Because clearly, do I assume she was just getting all of my correspondence and ignoring it? Or was my correspondence somehow falling into some sort of black hole that, it wasn't even getting to her at all? I don't know. I don't want to be, paranoid about this, but it seems really weird that as soon as this other guy contacted her, suddenly she called me back. That seems kind of suspicious to me. But again, I don't want to assume the worst in people. I just don't have an explanation for why for 30 days it was just like all my correspondence was going into a pit. So the thing is, she calls me back this afternoon, and because the universe has an incredibly cruel sense of humor, she managed to call at the exact moment I was in the bathroom and didn't have my phone on me. So naturally, it goes to voicemail. She does leave a voicemail. She also emails me. And this is the same email I'd been trying to contact her with for, again, a month. I was like, okay, surely she wouldn't ghost me again if I tried to call her right back, like literally minutes after she called. But nope, she didn't answer. I left a voicemail again, left an email again. 2 days pass, no call back, no email response, nothing. It's just like she's ghosting me again. And this is where I start to get a little more paranoid, because I'm just like, okay, like, is she just deliberately doing this for some reason? Like, what would be that reason? I don't know. Anyway, so I called back Dependable Bob a second time, because he'd been nice enough to give me his personal extension, which, like I said, above and beyond this guy. This was not his case. He had no reason to help me. He just literally out of the goodness of his heart, he wanted to try and get this thing kicked along. He sent them another email, and this time it seems like Sally's manager must have intervened directly instead of Sally, because I got a call from a different person almost immediately. We're just gonna call her Janet, who was gonna take over the case from Sally. Because I'd basically told Bob, like, I don't understand what's going on with Sally. She does not seem to really want to converse with me. So can I get somebody else? Literally anyone else. And when like 15 minutes after Janet got off the phone with me, she called back saying they found another dealership who agreed to help. I have no idea why it only took Janet 15 minutes, but it took Sally weeks to find a dealership to say yes. That doesn't make any sense to me either. Like, there were multiple disconnects here that just don't make sense to me. So anyway, at this point, progress is being made. I was handed back off to the Michigan buyback department for the second time. Thankfully not to Martha this time, since Martha apparently didn't know what she was doing. Or something. I don't know. Her heart wasn't in it. We'll say that. Her heart wasn't in it. And they were able to reconfirm within a day that the dealership was ready to help. Once GM had to send like a final paperwork packet to them, basically, for the final details of the buyback. I assume it also had the check in it. So the following week, the dealership called up, and they just needed to call to schedule an appointment so we can do the handoff. Handoff was painless. They took a real quick look around the car, like very brief, which I was surprised. I thought they were gonna like put it up on the lifts and like inspect it. I guess it was in such clean shape, they figured. So I figured they were just like, yeah, whatever, this car's fine. So yeah, just a quick look at it. And then they brought me into the service manager's office. I signed a little bit of paperwork, and they handed me my check. This part went very smoothly. I was shocked by how easy it was after, months of fighting with GM's teams. This part seemed utterly painless. So ultimately, I got virtually all my money back. So this was like the full original purchase price, and then they just deduct basically however many miles you put on it, they do a deduction for wear at that point. So you get a little bit taken off the top. It seemed like it was about 26 cents per mile. I don't know if that's going to be consistent for everyone. Probably not. It probably varies wildly by state and all other factors. But that seemed to be about what it was that they were subtracting from the car. So, I hadn't driven the car very much during this whole insane process, so that worked out fine. So at the end of all this, I never really got an answer as to why Sally seemingly fell off the face of the planet for a month. In fact, she suddenly responded after Bob emailed her, and her manager almost immediately made it look like she was deliberately avoiding me. It's possible my mistake was trying to navigate this without a lawyer. I don't imagine they would have ghosted a lawyer, at least. Or maybe the whole process is just deliberately built to wear people down so they give up. Anyway, the car's gone, I got my money, and all it cost me was several months of absolute misery. I don't know if this will help anyone. It's more of a cautionary tale. But I did it on at least share my experience so people are mentally prepared if they choose to go through this process, that depending on what reps you get, this could either be very easy or very hard. In my case, I seem to have gotten short end of the stick on that. But anyway, if you made it this far, thanks for listening to my rant.